to. So, hello everybody, and welcome to the fifth series of Music Meets. Today I have my teacher and a huge inspiration in my life, Norman Beedie from Music College. And he's a professor at the RCS for piano, and he taught me as well. And I'm so pleased to have him today with us, talking about piano technique and interpretation. Hi, Norman. Do you want to?
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, or even good evening.
Yes. So there have been a few questions actually, Norman. I asked some of the students and people if they wanted to ask anything specifically about. So we'll have a small session in this meeting where I ask about their particular queries. Some of them are from very little ones. So it would be a huge inspiration if you could enlighten them on those. But let's start, I think, with just basic piano technique and interpretation. And my first question that I really wanted to ask you was, where does how important is technique um, to express oneself? So what is the connection between a good technique and a musician's expressivity?
Well, first of all, we have to understand the word technique. Usually, we read and hear about technique as being the ability to move the fingers at the right time to correspond with the notation that's on the page. For me, technique needs to go a little bit deeper than that. And we need to understand that there are two aspects to technique. One is the mechanics, the ability of the fingers to move on the correct notes. And I call that mechanics. And the other is the feeling or the aesthetic concept of the music. That's what's behind the notes. So we can get the mechanics up to speed, if you like, up to the mark, to play well, correctly with our fingers. But that doesn't guarantee that we play with music, with the musical impulse from ourselves, the musical impulse that makes us want to do this thing, and also the musical impulse that was in the composer's mind when he or she put these notes down on paper. When you have the mechanics and the ability to understand the music, then I think you can put the two things together, the mechanics and the ability to understand. And then I think we can say we have technique. Technique isn't merely playing the notes, but that is first. If we don't learn to play the notes with our fingers and our arms, and of course that is directed from our heads, if we don't learn to do that well, then we can't guarantee that our musical concepts and will come across, our feelings. So we have to look at these things clearly and understand what we mean. So just to recap, technique for me is mechanics and the feeling and the knowledge of what the music is saying.
So in a sense, technique and interpretation are not very far off from each other. If you have a good technique, it should technically lead into a good interpretation.
If you use your mechanics well and are very caring and careful about how you use your fingers, and I'm not meaning precious, I'm not meaning very precious, but if you really care about how you use your fingers, your hands, your arms, your shoulders, your body, if you care about that, then you have a good means, a method of putting your musical thoughts. The word interpretation, I don't like terribly much. because it means we all have a different thought process. I think this should happen. I think that should happen. And when you look into the music, to know that a piece of music goes to a cadence, a perfect cadence at the end of a phrase, isn't a question of talent. It's a question of observation. Then when you decide how much the dominant power is in your performance relating to the tonic, 5 goes to 1. When you've decided that on an aesthetic level, then I think perhaps some people could look at you and say that's your interpretation. But I can't think that 5 should be weak and 1 should be strong and call that interpretation, because it's just not correct. It's not part of the structure, the sonic structure of our music, classical Western music.
Right. Then how is it, do you think? Because there's so many people who perform, and they perform quite differently. The same piece being performed quite differently with different layers. Where does the line? Where do you draw the line between individuality and what the composer wants? How do you come to that understanding? I'm sure it takes many years, but maybe from your experience.
For some people, it would appear when you listen to them that the line is drawn very easily and very quickly. I know the notes, therefore I will just play them. And people will say, he does it with, or she does it with a great deal of confidence. You need confidence, but you also need to think, what is the composer doing? Now, these big questions, like how is the composer, why is the biggest one is, why is the composer doing what he's doing or she is doing? There's no answer. I don't know. I really don't know. So knowing that there is no ultimate answer to why the composer wrote these notes, I would say that I have to get to 99.9% of understanding the music before I can say I have an interpretation. Now that to some people is just, oh, well, what's the point of listening to me in my performances? It's a question of going very deep, very, very deep. And Eastern philosophies come into it. I haven't studied Eastern philosophies, but I've read about them. And I've also looked at my own philosophy and read about Western philosophies. And I realized that often the Eastern philosophy gets a little bit closer to where I'm going with my music, to the point where I cannot say where the line is between doing what the composer wants and my interpretation. Because, well, let me put it this way. Doing what the composer wants isn't just crescendo, diminuendo, allegro. What does that mean? With life. Well, you play with life, I play with life, everybody plays. We're all alive, happily. It's a question of putting everything into the melting pot and seeing what comes out at the end. I don't follow recipes when I cook. But when my wife bakes, she follows recipes because that's a science. The science of raising agents and mixing flour and water and fat, and that's a science. I don't do that. I tend to put stuff into the pot and we'll see what comes out. And in a way, my performances are a little bit like that. And I remember thinking about one of my favorite pianists, Emil Gilels, that he would set his telescope. Well, some pianists would set their telescopes up in their yard and say, I'm going to show you the moon. I'm going to show you the moon and all the craters on the moon. And I have the names for them all. And you will say, how wonderful, Norman. That's wonderful. With Emil Gilels, his invitation was to go into the yard because he had a rocket there. And he was going to fly to the moon. And he was going to go around the dark side of the moon. And there was no guarantee that he would come out the other side and come back home. It's, for me, listening to him, it was the art of putting together a performance, not an interpretation, putting together a performance. I listen to other people and I sense I'm listening to a performance. It's been organized. I know the names of this. I know the names of that. I can tell you that cadence. I can tell you that scale. Da 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 da. And here I will give you a lecture in performing it of this piece of music. But with Gilels, I always felt we were on a journey of him putting it together that night.
I see
And
now.
so I can listen to two recordings of his, which are on the internet, of the Zelotti Bach arrangement, and two performances from Gilels, one in a festival, and it's very good. It's very good. His standards were very high. And there's another performance in Moscow when he does something miraculous. And he manages to put together all the pieces so that he takes us to the moon, lands us on the moon, and is able to bring us back home. He takes us that distance. That to me is what interpretation should be about, putting it together, but not a thought out, here is my interpretation.
I see. That makes a lot of sense, actually. It's difficult to put into words, though, isn't it?
It takes me time to put it into words, and I think it takes time for people to assimilate the words. But when you have in your traditions in India and in the Far East, gurus who will tell you how to see, as our philosophers saw and mystics saw, to see the world in a grain of sand.
Mm.
To see the world in a grain of sand. How do we describe that to people? How do we get people to think that? Just remember this, that a grain of sand is all an oyster needs to produce a pearl.
That's beautiful. Norman, as a teacher, now I'm going to ask something personal to me. You can teach a student the basics, and you can teach them about the physical aspects, and you can train them to think about the character and all this interpretation and stuff you can fix in their minds. But how do you lead them to experience this? How do you lead them to go beyond this?
My greatest musician that I actually studied with was Nadia Boulanger. And she had three aspects to her training with me. I don't know about her training with other people. And I don't know if this was a philosophy she held, although as I look back on it now, over almost 40, 50, almost 50 years, I believe it was a philosophy that she would adhere to, but it was never presented as such. And I'll tell you what it is. Teach. Very important. We have to teach the facts. Educate. Draw out of the student. Mentor. Advise the student from a distance. Okay, teach the facts. How is harmony put together? I'm talking about classical Western music, but you can relate this to Indian music and other great disciplines. You have to teach in classical Western music how harmony happens. Rhythm. The tetrachords that make up harmony, the tetrachords that make up the scale. Take it right back to basics. That's teaching. Mentoring is the next aspect, the aspect you talk about. How do we draw out of the student? So often, teachers keep teaching. They keep teaching. Here are the facts, here are the facts, here are the facts, here are the facts. And the fact of how this music should sound, oh, sorry, just knocked my glasses off on my nose. Right. How the music should sound, the teacher will teach you. So the teacher plays, the pupil copies. That is not really doing very much for the student. They're just becoming a copyist. But teaching the facts must move on to the mentoring of the student. And that is when you stop telling the facts and you start taking out the music, drawing the students' music out of them, making them aware that they have a musical reaction to the strength of a 5 going to a 1 perfect cadence or a 4 going to a 1. These are just the cadences. The sense of phrasing, we can say it goes to there and it comes back down. But until the student actually expresses that and doesn't copy. Copying is the worst thing that can happen because it's the end of teaching and stops us flowing on. We can't get beyond copying. You have to copy the teacher. Well, you don't have to. Sometimes the teacher says, do what I do. No. We teach them what the music is, how it's put together, but we mustn't stop them flowing on to the next level is where you start drawing out the student's reaction. And not because you say it should go this way, it should go that way. The student needs to find out what does allegro mean? Oh, I can give you a translation of it, but what does it feel like? I can't tell you how it feels because feeling is in here. I can't do it. I can say it makes you excited, but it's not really what allegro means. And why did the composer be so vague as to say allegro? So education is the next aspect. And from education, drawing out the student, putting the facts in, teaching, drawing the student out, not the facts, the student, through the facts. We must come to the third aspect, which is mentoring, which is careful analysis of the complete being of the artist or the musician. What are they doing? Where are they going? How are they approaching this? There. All these things, mentoring. So all that has to be encompassed. And sometimes in our society in Britain, we mix up teaching with education. It's all called education. It's all called education. So what's the problem? You're a teacher, you educate. No. Teaching is facts going in. Education is drawing the person out. Mentoring is very careful advice, which may be accurate, may be proved to be inaccurate, but very careful thought process of who that person is, where they're going, and why they're doing it.